before we get into this, I want you to think about someone you know. Maybe it's someone at work, maybe it's someone in your family, someone who's clearly talented, clearly capable. But no matter what they achieve, it's never enough. They're always looking over their shoulder, they're always suspicious of someone new, they're always fighting with someone new. That person with the right skill and the right amount of power is Richard Nixon. And today, we're not going to talk about Watergate, the scandal. We're going to talk about Watergate as a symptom. Because the time those five men got caught breaking into the DNC, his fate had already been decided decades earlier by the man he chose to be and the way he ruined his enemies. So before we get into that, let's be fair to Nixon first, because I don't think that history always does that. He came from nothing. He was born in 1913 from California, raised in a modest family. He didn't have any connections, no money, no silver spoon. Yet he found a way to graduate from Duke Law School. He served in the Navy, rose all the way to lieutenant commander, and by 1946, barely out of his military career, he had already defeated a five-term congressman. Now, this is very impressive. As someone who was obsessed. And by 1952, just 6 years into his political career, he's the vice presidential nominee for Dwight Eisenhower. 6 years and that progression, that's not luck. That is an obsession of someone's ambition. But here's what I want you to pay attention to, because this is where the story gets very interesting and where the cracks start to show. How did he beat that congressman in 1946, the very first one? Well, the short answer is he destroyed him. He leaned into alleged communist sympathies. Unproven, murky, questionable. He buried that man in it. And it worked. And in 1950, running for the Senate, he did it again. This time he printed the thing called pink sheets, comparing his vote record to his opponent's vote records. Both times, his opponents never recovered. They were not able to return to politics. That senator was Helen Galligan Douglas. So before he was even ever in the Oval Office, before Watergate, before any of it, he had already decided who he was going to be. He decided that the only way to win was to make sure the other person can't stand up. Ask yourself this: if you believe that from the beginning, that you can't win on your talent or merit alone, what does that say about how you see yourself? So let's talk about the insecurity underneath. This is why I think that the story of Richard Nixon is relatable to the normal human being. It's very fascinating. And honestly, it's the part that makes him human in a way that is uncomfortable to admit. He was deeply and profoundly insecure. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it as a diagnosis. Because if you trace every decision he made, every attack, every paranoid move, every act of destruction, it led back to one place. He never believed that he was enough. And then JFK walked in. Everything that Nixon feared about himself, standing right in front of him, was in a tailored suit. Think about this, okay? Before we face that, Nixon's wife, Pat, initially rejected him. He had to pursue her. Kennedy was the kind of man women moved towards without him having to ask. The kind that got the Marilyn Monroes of the world. Harvard educated, rich, with daddy's money. He's good looking, he's charming. The room changed when he walked in. And he was young. Nixon was not. And to Nixon, a man who had to claw and scratch and compromise his integrity to get to the top, Kennedy represented everything that felt unfair about life. The idea that someone can just get things handed to them, no matter how hard you work. A man like that, they can just walk by and take everything you work for just by existing. I think when Nixon looked at Kennedy, he didn't see a political opponent. He saw a ghost of every room he've ever felt small in. And so in 1960, instead of running towards something, Nixon ran against Kennedy. His bitterness was very obvious. The two of them gave us the very first televised presidential debate. Some say, those who listen to the radio, that Nixon won. But if you watch TV, Kennedy won. His attack showed in Kennedy, who he barely had to try. Just by existing, he was already a winner. So there, hopeful, Nixon not thought he was going to win. But he lost by 120,000 votes in the popular vote. There was no wound quite like losing to the person you hate the most, especially when you believe the loss proves everything you were afraid of yourself. So he licks his wounds, right? He goes back to California. Then now he tries to run for governor. Guess what? He loses. He goes to the press afterwards saying something, and I'm paraphrasing here. You can't kick Nixon around anymore. He acted like it was over. He knew it wasn't. He moved to New York, repositioned himself, rebranding himself as a foreign policy expert. And in 1968, the year America was burning, the year MLK and Robert Kennedy were both assassinated, the year the country was exhausted from Vietnam, Nixon walked back in and won. He was finally president. And here's the thing, he was actually good at it, with his opening of relations with China in 1970, literally reshaping the global economy. You feel the effects of that decision even today, in how trade works, in how supply chains are built. That is genuinely historic achievement. But there was a problem. His national security advisor, Henry Kissinger, was getting famous. And yet another JFK in his life. Like, he's getting globally famous. He was flying around the world, meeting with heads of states, getting nicknames like Lone Ranger of Diplomacy, getting celebrated while Nixon sat in the White House, having nothing much to do than listen to protesters in the White House. Next thing you know, he was drinking more and more. And Nixon, the man who had worked hard his entire life to matter, to be seen, to be the person in the room, he couldn't stand it. So what does he do? He started secretly recording phone calls and meetings in the White House out of insecurity, out of a need to be paranoid, out of a need to control something, anything. And a decision, that irrational, emotionally driven decision that would become the weapon that destroyed him. Let's talk about the beginning of the end. June 1972. Five men are caught breaking into the Watergate complex. This part we all know. The headquarters of the DNC. They were there to spy and wiretap on Nixon's political opponents. Nixon did not order the break in, at least not directly, and he ordered the cover up. But he ordered the cover up. And that's where he crossed the line. He could never come back from that. This is the part that gets me in that part of the story. By 1972, he was ahead in the polls. Like, by a lot. There was no way his opponent was going to beat him. He was going to go on and win a landslide victory. So he got like 46.7 million votes, and his opponent only got 28.9 million. He didn't have to do anything. He was going to win. But again, the paranoia had eaten him so deep that he couldn't trust what the numbers said. Deep down, and I genuinely believe this, he was still fighting Kennedy. He was still the kid from California who believed that all it took was one attractive man with money, with the right words, to take everything from him. So he couldn't stop. He didn't know how. And when the break-in became public, he had a choice, right? Door number one, come clean. Door number two, he could have and acknowledge that this is the culture that his leadership created in a way that is taking some form of responsibility, right? But no, after that, he could have just let justice run its course because he was gonna win anyway. Instead, what he do? He went on defense, one by one, every person around him. People had absolved him. Same survival instincts, because that's what he taught them. Destroy your enemies. And then, one by one, they turned on him. Because that's the thing about surrounding yourself with people who operate that way. When the walls close in, they do to you exactly what you taught them to do. What follows is almost hard to watch if you think about it as a human story rather than a political one. He fired the special prosecutor investigating him. Imagine that. His attorney general resigned rather than carry out the order. His deputy was fired for refusing too. Someone eventually complied and then resigned after that. This became known as the Saturday Night Massacre, a revolving door of highest officials in the land. And at the center of it all is a man in complete freefall. He went on TV and said, with all the cameras watching, I'm not a crook. And when the tapes came out, the recordings from the White House, he'd made out of paranoia over Henry Kissinger's popularity, now was coming back to bite him. Subpoenaed by the courts, he didn't want to comply. He offered written summaries instead. When that didn't work, he handed over 7 of the 9 tapes, just 7. and one of them had been tampered with. Every move he made was now a bit predictable. Every move by a desperate man, and it made everything worse. The man who had spent decades outsmarting opponents was now playing a four move chess game in public, and everyone can see exactly what was coming next. By August of 1974, facing certain impeachment, he resigned, the only American president in the history of the world to do so. Gerald Ford pardoned him about a month later. Here's what I keep coming back to when I think about Nixon. The things that destroyed him were not his enemies, they were his own wounds, self inflicted ones. The insecurity, the fear, the belief that he could never truly be enough. That someone with more charm, more money, more ease would always be waiting to take it all away. He built an entire career on destroying others because they could destroy him. And in doing so, he created a world where no one could be trusted because he was someone who couldn't be trusted. He attracted people made in his image, and when it all fell apart, they scattered exactly the way that he would have. The recordings that brought him down, he made those because he couldn't handle someone else getting credit for the work he did. The cover up that ended his presidency, he panicked over a race he was already winning. The allies that abandoned him, he never cultivated them. He ruled with fear, not love, not respect, not loyalty. What I find haunting about Nixon is this. I don't think he ever looked inward. I don't think he ever sat down alone in a quiet room, asked, what role am I playing in my own misery? Can I change this? Everything was everyone else's fault. The press, the Democrats, Kennedy, Kissinger, the deep state, before there was even a term for it. And yet, his greatest accomplishments, the things that actually changed the world, came from when he was leading, when he was building, not burning. The lesson I take from Nixon is not about politics. It's about this. You can work harder than everyone else, climb higher and faster than everyone else, achieve things that change history, and still be completely consumed by what you're running away from. Because if what you're running away from is yourself, you will never outrun it. There is no title out there. No landslide victory, no Oval Office. If the person you're running from is yourself. Everything Nixon did, the attacks, the paranoia, the recordings, the cover up, came from the needing external validation to feel okay. He needed to win to feel worthy. He needed to matter to feel safe. And when you build your identity on outcomes you can't control, you will spend your entire life in a state of low grade terror. Here's what accountability should have looked like if he were born right now and he were in office today. True accountability isn't just saying I was wrong, it's being able to sit in the discomfort of being wrong without it destroying your sense of self. Nixon, he couldn't do that. Every mistake felt existential to him because his identity was so fragile. If he admitted fault, he wasn't just admitting a bad decision, he was confirming his deepest fear that he was never good enough to begin with. The cure for that is not confidence in the traditional sense. It's what psychologists call self compassion, the ability to acknowledge your flaws, your failures, your losses, without them becoming your entire identity. It sounds soft, but it's genuinely one of those hardest things a person can develop. For a normal person hearing this, here's what it actually looks like in practice. First thing is learning how to separate what you do from who you are. Nixon lost to Kennedy, that's a fact. But Nixon turned it into evidence of a verdict about his entire self-worth as a human being. That's the cognitive distortion that ruins him. You can fail at something without being a failure. The second thing is getting honest about who you're really competing with. Nixon wasn't running against Kennedy. He was running against an idea of himself that he could never reach. Most people who are consumed by insecurity are doing the same thing. They're not actually threatened by the person in front of them. They're threatened by the gap between who they are and who they think they're supposed to be. The third thing, and this is the one Nixon never did, is letting people in. Real people, not loyalists, not yes men, not people who need something from you. Nixon had no one in his life who could tell him the truth without fearing him. This is an incredibly dangerous place to be. The research on this is consistent. People who have even one or two relationships where they feel genuinely seen and accepted are dramatically more resilient when things go wrong. He built walls around and called it strength. It was the opposite. The fourth thing is the hardest. You have to grieve the version of yourself you thought you were supposed to be. Nixon never grieved losing to Kennedy. He just redirected that wound into fuel and kept going. But unprocessed pain doesn't disappear. It just shows up sideways in paranoia, in cruelty, in self destruction. At some point, you have to sit down and mourn the things mourn the things that didn't go your way, and wanted to accept that you are still a whole person without them. The irony of Nixon's story is that the president proved he was enough. He was enough. The landslide in 1972 proved it. The China achievement proved it. But he couldn't receive it. The evidence right in front of him in his internal world was too loud to hear it. That's the real tragedy and the real warning. You can be given everything you ever wanted and still be completely imprisoned if you haven't done the inner work. The external world cannot fix an internal wound. It never could and it never will be.